What if the creatures we've always believed existed only in legend had actually once lived on this earth? Modern science is slowly revealing that some of those so-called monsters weren't imagined at all. They were real species that existed in the distant past. And the question that lingers with me most is this: did they truly disappear, or are they simply beyond our current understanding? If we begin with the ocean, still less understood than the surface of the moon, there's one story that captured global attention. In 1997, scientists detected a strange sound deep in the South Pacific. They called it the Bloop. It didn't resemble anything ever recorded before, and it was powerful enough to travel thousands of miles underwater. For a long time, no one could explain its source, and naturally, people began to imagine possibilities. Some believed it wasn't a natural phenomenon at all, but evidence of something massive, something larger than any known animal. Later, scientists offered a more grounded explanation. The sound was likely caused by large ice masses cracking and shifting in Antarctica. But even with that answer, the bigger question remains: have we truly explored the ocean? Even today, most of the seafloor is still uncharted. So the idea that enormous, unknown creatures might exist beyond our reach isn't as far-fetched as it once seemed. And in truth, Earth's history has already given us examples of such giants. Leedsichthys, a fish from the Jurassic period, is believed to have reached lengths of up to 50 feet, about the size of 3 buses lined up end to end. What's fascinating is that despite its immense size, it wasn't a fearsome predator. Its mouth was filled with hundreds of tiny teeth, but its primary function was filter feeding, much like modern whales. Still, imagine a creature of that scale moving silently through the dark depths. Its presence alone would be enough to make anyone feel small. And if something like Leedsichthys once existed, then the idea of other massive, undiscovered life forms beneath the ocean no longer feels so impossible. The Bloop may have been explained, but the ocean still holds far more stories than we've yet been able to tell. If the ocean once sustained creatures of immense size, then what lingers in my mind even more is something else entirely, not their scale, but their strangeness. Because throughout history, there have been beings that were not only large, but so unusual in form that they almost defy imagination. And that's when one particular name comes to mind: Cthulhu. In many people's imagination, Cthulhu is something beyond comprehension, part human, part octopus, with massive tentacles and strange, almost otherworldly wings, a being said to lie dormant beneath the ocean, waiting for the day it awakens. At first glance, it feels purely fictional. But what's fascinating is that when scientists began studying ancient fossils, they uncovered a real creature with some surprisingly similar traits: Tusoteuthis. Around 90 million years ago, during the Cretaceous period when dinosaurs still ruled the land, the oceans had predators of their own. Tusoteuthis was a giant squid that could reach nearly 30 feet in length. And in the deep, dark waters where sunlight barely reaches, a creature like that wouldn't just be large, it would be overwhelming. Its tentacles are believed to have been incredibly powerful, capable of seizing and crushing prey within moments. And when I think about that, I can't help but wonder, are the stories humans have passed down truly just imagination, or are they, at times, attempts to describe something real, something seen, but not fully understood in the language of that era? Perhaps Cthulhu is nothing more than fiction, but it's also possible that, somewhere in the distant past, people encountered creatures like Tusoteuthis, or heard stories of them, and from those fragments, a legend was born. And if that has happened before then, it raises a quiet possibility that there are still things out there we don't yet fully understand. And if what lies beneath the ocean blurs the line between reality and imagination, then what hides deep within the jungle offers a different kind of feeling closer to us, yet just as unsettling. Because unlike the distant ocean, places like the Amazon rainforest still exist here on Earth, and we know that much of it remains unexplored. For generations, indigenous tribes have passed down stories of a creature known as Mapinguari. It's described as large, covered in thick fur, with a single strange eye, and even a mouth in an unusual place. But what frightened people most wasn't just its appearance, it was the smell, a stench so overwhelming that anyone who came too close was said to collapse. For a long time, these stories were dismissed as folklore, perhaps a way to explain strange sounds in the forest or to warn children away from danger. But then science entered the conversation, and things began to shift. researchers discovered fossils of Megatherium, a massive ground sloth that lived in South America around 10,000 years ago. When I first saw a reconstruction of it, what stood out wasn't just its size, standing up to 20 feet tall and weighing as much as an elephant, but its enormous curved claws. These weren't just for feeding. They were powerful enough to tear through anything that came too close. And that's where things become thought-provoking. If a creature like Megatherium truly existed, then the stories of Mapinguari appearing in the same region no longer seem so far-fetched. Some theories suggest that what tribes described might be distant cultural memories passed down over generations of a real animal that once lived there, which leads to a simple but difficult question. With over 80% of the Amazon still not fully explored, can we really be certain that every large creature has already been discovered? Maybe Megatherium disappeared long ago, but it's just as possible that, somewhere deep within those dense forests, where even sunlight struggles to reach there, are still things we haven't seen, only heard about in stories that seem too strange to be real. And when the mysteries hidden deep within the forest leave us wondering how much remains undiscovered, the sky, something that feels so familiar, opens up a different kind of question. Because long before humans ever learned to fly, we were already telling stories about enormous winged creatures soaring above us. Dragons. Across cultures, dragons were never just monsters. In Europe, they were often portrayed as fearsome guardians of treasure, powerful, dangerous, and nearly unstoppable. In Asia, however, they carried a very different meaning, symbolizing strength, wisdom, and something almost divine. The details may vary, but the core image remains the same: a massive, winged creature capable of ruling the skies. For a long time, we assumed these stories came purely from imagination, but once again, science complicates that assumption. Researchers have uncovered evidence of Quetzalcoatlus, a flying reptile that lived around 70 million years ago. The first time I truly grasped its size, I had to pause and picture it: a wingspan of nearly 36 feet, comparable to a small airplane. When it took off, it wouldn't just rise quietly into the air. It would cast a shadow so vast, it could momentarily dim the ground below. What stays with me isn't just its size, but the way it lived. Scientists believe Quetzalcoatlus may have hunted relatively large prey, possibly even animals close to human size. If a creature like that appeared in our skies today, it wouldn't just be surprising, it would feel almost impossible to explain. Even its name adds another layer to the story. It was named after Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity of Aztec culture, a detail that quietly blurs the line between myth and science. And perhaps that's the most thought-provoking part of all: the idea that stories of dragons may not have come from nothing. It's possible that, at some point in the distant past, people saw or heard about creatures like Quetzalcoatlus. Over time, those encounters may have been reshaped, exaggerated, and passed down until they became legend. So when we think about dragons, maybe the real question isn't whether they existed at all, but whether they once existed in a form we're only now beginning to understand. And when creatures that once ruled the skies force us to rethink what we've long called myth, the next part of the story brings us back down to earth, somewhere we tend to believe we understand best. And yet, history reminds us that even the open plains were once home to animals far beyond anything we would expect. In many cultures, the image of a half-man, half-bull like the Minotaur carries a sense of both familiarity and fear, powerful, aggressive, and nearly impossible to defeat. For most of us, it feels like pure imagination, but when we look at what science has uncovered, it's possible that such images didn't come entirely from nowhere. Millions of years ago, in North America, there existed a real animal whose sheer size would stop anyone in their tracks: Bison Latifrons. For the first time I saw a reconstruction of it. What stood out wasn't just its height over 7 feet tall or its length of nearly 15 feet. It was the horns. Spanning close to 10 feet from tip to tip, they transformed it from something familiar into something almost overwhelming. This wasn't a bison in the way we think of one. Today it felt more like a living force, built to dominate its surroundings. Some indigenous tribes referred to animals like this as thunder beasts, not by accident, but because each step could make the ground seem to tremble. Picture a creature of that scale moving across an open plain, and it's easy to understand how it could leave such a lasting impression, one strong enough to echo into legend. What's even more striking is its strength. Research suggests that with a single charge, Bison Latifrons could launch a predator the size of a lion into the air. In a world where survival depended on raw power, this wasn't just an animal, it was a presence. And then, like so many others, it disappeared. Climate shifts, changing environments, and eventually the arrival of humans as a new kind of predator all played a role. What remains today are fossils and stories. But looking back, I find myself realizing something simple. The line between myth and reality isn't always as clear as we assume. The Minotaur may never have existed in the exact form described in legend, but creatures like Bison Latifrons, the true giants of the ancient world, may well have inspired the human need to imagine and to remember. And when I step back and look at all of these stories together, I realize that what truly stays with us isn't the answers, but the questions that remain. Maybe some species are truly gone, or maybe they still exist, just beyond the edge of what we currently understand. What do you think? Of all these creatures, which one do you believe could still be out there today?